this is really meant to be kind of an agenda setting for our 2021, not even just the legislative session, but the 2021 year. So today, it's going to be, we're going to give some background information about water issues, but we really want to highlight the importance of listening to you all. This is really meant to hear what folks are thinking and folks' perspectives on these important water issues. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share like a really quick presentation about IEC's water victories and progress, and the agenda for the rest of this hour that we're all together. Sorry guys, I haven't done one of these in a while. Okay, here we go, present. Okay, so I'll just say a little bit about IEC for folks who are not familiar, but IEC has been around since 1975, and we originally started as a handful of environmental grassroots organizations. And since then, we've actually ballooned to nearly 100 environmental groups throughout the state. And so a big part of our work is coalition building, right? Using those 100+ groups, using their knowledge and their resources in a way that's most effective and most efficient, with the ultimate goal that everybody's voice in the environmental field is covered and it's heard in Springfield, and that when lawmakers are thinking about laws, they're thinking about the environment first. It's not an afterthought. And so another part of our work too, in order to get to that same goal, is education. So doing things like blog posts, reports, whatever you may have it, and things like today, like doing a town hall. And so that's really what IEC is doing, and that's kind of part of our mission. So here's the agenda. I'm going to go through really quickly IEC's water victories from the last couple of years, and our progress and where we want to go forward. And then we'll have a panel presentation. We have some awesome people. We have Justin Williams from the Metropolitan Planning Council, Caroline Pakenham from Elevate Energy, Annalisa Castro from the Alliance for the Great Lakes, Marcella Keenan Bondi from the Center for Neighborhood Technology, Molly Cordes and Laura Barkhausen from Openlands, and Albert Ettinger. And then after that, it will be followed by a second half an hour of public comments, kind of like a Q&A session as well. And then we plan to end at 1 p.m. We may go a little bit over, but just plan for 1 p.m. And then the format for the public comment after the panel, you can either post in the chat and request to speak, or you can write your public comment in the Zoom chat box, or if you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. And then finally, if maybe you're not comfortable with that and you'd rather just email someone, you can email me, and that's Ayana, IYANA, @ilenviro.org. Finally, again, we're asking folks, just please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less if you do choose to speak. We want to make sure that we are able to hear everybody and everybody has an equal opportunity to participate. So, making waves. IEC has had so many victories in the last 45+ years that it'd be too much to cover. So I'm just gonna go about 5 years back. And so one thing that we did in 2014, we had the microbeads banned. I know that folks are maybe familiar with like those face gels or body washes that have like those little microbeads and they're supposed to exfoliate or whatever they're supposed to do, but turns out they're really bad for the environment and water treatment plants can't filter them out. So we basically led legislation that banned it first in Illinois, and then that following year it was banned nationwide. And then the second victory that we had in 2015, we passed the Preventing Lead in Drinking Water Act. The two biggest pieces from this bill is that it required testing at schools and child care centers for lead in Illinois. And then it also required water suppliers to come up with an inventory of lead service lines so that we actually know where they're at and so that we can actually replace them. And then we also, this past session, 2019 session, we had our Cleaner Water Jobs for All Act. This basically created a funding and a resource for a water workforce pipeline program. And so it's with the thought that if we're gonna replace lead service lines, if we're gonna dig up water treatment infrastructure, and we're gonna improve all these different things, then we need to prioritize employment and training to these communities that are already disproportionately impacted by these issues. And so, part of that is just making sure that while we're addressing water infrastructure, we're also addressing other equity issues as well. And then the equitable water rates, this basically requires a study for water rate setting in northeastern Illinois, and then eventually it would be to the rest of the state. This is just to figure out, why is it that the water rates may be higher in Chicago versus in East St. Louis? And so part of that is just basically with an ultimate outcome that we can have some legislative actions that come from that. And then finally, we've also, throughout the years, we worked on securing funding for a lot of nutrient pollution prevention strategies. So things like Illinois Soil and Water Conservation Districts and programs like the Fall Covers for Spring Savings Program and the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy. And so I'll go through really quickly about the 2020 water legislation. The first thing that we did that is on our top of our priority list is lead service line replacement. I talked about that a little bit earlier with the Clean Water Jobs for All. But this would basically require municipalities or water suppliers to replace lead service lines in their communities. And it would also prioritize doing that in vulnerable communities. So these are lead burden communities and environmental justice communities. And finally, it would create a statewide water assistance program. And then we also have PFAS. Folks who may not be familiar, PFAS is used in everyday stuff like non-stick foodware, water repellent clothing, and basically the issue there is that it not only is like harmful to our environment when it's in our water, but it's also harmful within our bodies. And it's been linked to thyroid issues, high cholesterol, and even cancer. So we wanted obviously to not be in firefighting foam and food packaging, but we don't want it to be in anything either. And then linked to our lead service line replacement bill, we also wanted a bill that would test for lead at parks. And then we wanted to create a permanent fund for the nutrient loss reduction strategy. And finally, we also introduced a resolution that would focus on protecting communities in floodplains. So this is really overall what we wanted to do 2020 in the 2020 legislative session. Unfortunately, none of these were considered during the 3-day special session, but we plan to introduce some of these in either the veto session this fall or next spring. So we hope to continue to make a way and make waves for water protection in Illinois. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen just for a second, and I'm just going to share a quick poll before we get started. We're going to first pass it off to Justin from MPC, but right before, I just want to send out a poll really quick, and it's basically asking, what water issue do you feel impacts your day-to-day life the most? A couple more seconds. Okay, and so it looks like stormwater and flooding is a really big issue. So Marcella from CNT will talk a little bit more about that further along in the presentations. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to Justin from the Metropolitan Planning Council, and he'll be talking about lead service line replacement.
Hey everyone, just give me 1 second to get this up. All right, okay, get rid of this. Can everyone see my screen? We good?
Yep.
Great. So thanks, Ayana. Ayana mentioned that I'm Justin Williams. I'm an associate at the Metropolitan Planning Council here in Chicago, where I work on the research team. And my role on the research team is to work across program areas to coordinate our legislative agenda and do research to advocate on behalf of our policy priorities. And I just want to talk to you guys today about one of the policy priorities we've been working on with the Illinois Environmental Council, and that's replacing all lead service lines in Illinois. Before I talk about the policy, I just want to level set a little bit and talk a little bit about what a lead service line is and why it's a problem. So a service line is a pipe that delivers water from the water main, which runs under the street, to your house. So you can see it as that brown horizontal line that runs across the bottom quarter or so of this diagram here. That service line can be made out of lead if the home was built before 1986. That's a problem because we've known for a long time that lead is a toxic substance, and these lead service lines, when these service lines are made out of lead, they can leach lead into your home's drinking water. That can lead to some pretty serious lifelong health problems and developmental problems, especially for young children. So the short story here is that service lines can be made out of lead. Lead's toxic, so we need to replace all lead service lines in the state. So how bad is the problem in Illinois? Two big takeaways here. One, we have quite a lot of lead service lines. We don't know exactly how many. We, in fact, lead the nation in states with the most lead service lines. Ohio is second in line with, I believe, around 650,000. Our best guess is that there's somewhere between 686,000 to 1.7 million. We know for certain there are at least 686,000 because of the lead service line inventory bill that Illinois Environmental Council helped to get passed a couple years ago. There could be as many as 1.7 million. The real number is probably somewhere in the middle. The second big takeaway here is that it's a statewide problem. And this map on the right gives you some vision of our best guess about where lead service lines are. So the darker blue, the county, the more potential lead service lines there are as a percentage of total lead service lines. So you'll notice that there are dark blue counties pretty much in every corner of the state. So what are we going to do about it? Senate Bill 2916, sponsored by Senator Steans, is a bill that the Metropolitan Planning Council, along with IEC, has been working on to replace all lead service lines in the state. At its most basic, the bill requires every utility in Illinois to go out and find all the lead service lines in their service area, and that's that inventory column there on the left, to make a plan for how they're going to replace all those lead service lines, and in particular to pay attention to high-risk areas. And then finally to actually go out and do the work of replacing all those service lines. Now I want to note that one reason we think this bill is an especially good model for this kind of bill is because we're making sure that there are two principles embedded in policy design at every stage. And the first one is equity. We want to make sure that every household in Illinois, regardless of income, can afford to have their lead service line replaced. The most important way that we're ensuring that is with a dedicated funding stream. So there would be a small fee attached to every water bill in the state that would create a grant program for utilities to go out and replace all lead service line. This means that individual homeowners aren't on the hook for the replacement cost of their service line, which low-income households may be unlikely to do. Second, we want to make sure that this is feasible. We want to make sure utilities can actually get this work done. So for instance, again, this dedicated funding mechanism is central to this. By providing utilities with a state-administered grant program funding, we can make sure that every utility, even if they have a concentrated low-income ratepayer base, isn't on the hook for dealing with this problem on their own. I'm happy to talk about the other aspects of this policy. In addition to the really clear health benefits, especially to young children, of replacing all lead service line in the States, there are also some pretty profound economic benefits and governance benefits. Just one of them that I'll talk about right now, we estimate that replacing every lead service line would yield about 144,000 jobs and create about $13 billion in economic output. And that's for an $8 billion investment. So the benefits pretty clearly outweigh the costs, strictly in terms of the economy and jobs, especially at a time when when unemployment rates are top of mind for people. Happy to say a lot more about this in the Q&A, but for now, I'm going to say thank you and hand things back to Ayana.
Thanks, Justin. Next, we're going to have Caroline Peckingham from Elevate Energy. She's going to present about water affordability and Chicago's water assistance program.
Great. Thank you so much. While we're getting the slides up here, again, my name is Caroline Packenham and the Water Program Manager at Elevate Energy. And a little bit of info about Elevate. What we do is we design and implement energy efficiency, water, and healthy housing programs. And our water program, what we do is we specifically focus on ensuring all residents have access to safe, affordable, and clean drinking water. And today, what we're going to do is give you a quick introduction to some of the water affordability challenges our region is facing, and then also briefly introduce you to some potential solutions for communities in Northeastern Illinois and across the state. So if we go to the second slide there, Iana.
Can you, so it's showing up on my screen. Are folks able to see the presentation?
I can see it, but I see the sidebar and it doesn't seem to be advancing.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's not in presentation mode. I think you need to hit enable editing to allow that.
Okay, sorry.
No worries.
Let me share this again. Okay, are we good now?
We're great. We're good to go.
Okay.
So what I want to start to do is just provide you a little bit of background information on some of the water affordability challenges that we're seeing across the country and in Northeastern Illinois. We're seeing water bills becoming more and more expensive every year. And this is really placing a strain on a lot of households. And we're also seeing that as many as 15 million Americans every year experience a water shutoff. Since about 2010, water rates have increased by 57% in 30 US cities. And then right here in Northeastern Illinois, what you're seeing on this slide is that in 2008, it was about $4 per 1,000 gallons of water. And then you're seeing up in 2018, that increased to over $7 per 1,000 gallons. So it's an issue across the country, and it's an issue here in the Chicago region. And if we flip to the next slide, I do want to give you a little bit of background on why we're seeing increasing water service rates across the country. Part of the reason for this is that our water infrastructure is really old and it's in need of repair and replacement. In a lot of communities, our water infrastructure was built about 80 to 100 years ago. There's also been a sharp decline in federal grants and subsidies for water infrastructure. And then as you have population changes in a region, that can also increase the cost of providing water services. And if we flip to the next slide, so we are seeing this increase in water services, and alongside of this, the ability to pay for water services is becoming more and more challenging for residents as we have a lot of wage stagnation and then increases in the cost of living. And so Elevate Energy, the Metropolitan Planning Council, and the Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, we conducted a study that was released this year on water affordability challenges in our region. And what we found is that 75% of communities in Northeastern Illinois have experienced water bill growth rates that are exceeding income growth rates over the past decade. We also found that in 72 municipalities in Northeastern Illinois, the lowest income earners, they have to work more than 8 hours each month to pay their water and sewer bill. So if we flip to the next slide, I do want to end just by talking about some of the ways that we can think about tackling water affordability in our region. And I think it's important to first kind of recognize that water affordability, it's a complex problem. So we're going to need multifaceted solutions. And I think the other important thing to recognize is that every community is unique. So a one-size-fits-all approach may not exist, but some of the bullets that you see on this slide, these are some ideas that can help us begin to tackle challenges of water affordability, things like implementing an affordable water rate structure, but having that in combination with things like leak repair, detection, and water efficiency programs. These are all things that, when taken together, may really help residents with some of these challenges that they're experiencing. And if we go to the next slide, one program that was launched recently to help address some of these growing issues of affordability is the City of Chicago's Utility Billing Relief Program. And what this program does is it offers eligible residents 50% rate reduction on their water and sewer bill, along with water debt forgiveness if they make on-time payments for a year in the program. If we go to the next page, to qualify for this program, there are income eligibility requirements, and then your bill does need to be tied to a single family home or a two-flat. And I encourage you all to learn more about this program at chicago.gov/UBR. And to wrap up the conversation on water affordability, I would really encourage you all to kind of keep three things in mind about water affordability. The first is that water costs are on the rise in our region, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for many of our neighbors to pay their water bills. The second is that water affordability, it's a complex problem. It's going to need multifaceted solutions, and it's essential to get input from the community on what some of those solutions should be. And then finally, we just encourage you to do everything you can to spread the word about the city's new utility billing relief program. It's really a great opportunity for folks who are experiencing challenges with their bills to get some assistance. So thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. And at this time, we have another polling question about water affordability. This one, I also just want to emphasize too with these questions, all responses are anonymous. So the first question is, do you know someone or do you yourself struggle to pay your water bill? Secondly, if you do, were you aware of the Chicago Utility Billing Relief Program before today? And do you plan on telling a friend now after seeing this presentation? So I'll go ahead and launch that for like 30 seconds and you guys go ahead and respond. Okay, interesting. So it seems like a lot of people don't, but the good news is that folks are willing to share about this program, which we appreciate. So we'll go ahead and go over next to, I believe, Annalisa from the Alliance for the Great Lakes is going to present next.
Hey everybody, can you hear me okay? And do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes and yes.
Okay, great. So I'm Annalisa with the Alliance for the Great Lakes. I'm going to speak today at sort of a very high level about the different Great Lakes issues we work on, primarily at sort of the regional scale, and touch on some of the things we do here in Illinois. Because the Great Lakes are huge and there is no shortage of information to be shared or work to be done, I'm also gonna leave my contact information here and on the last slide so you can feel free to reach out with questions. Are we going to, there we go. So the four sort of big buckets that we think about in terms of Great Lakes issues are agriculture and clean water, aquatic invasive species, water equity and access, and what some call emerging threats like plastic pollution and shoreline erosion. Starting off with agriculture and clean water, many of you are probably familiar with harmful algal blooms that are a result of rainwater or snowmelt washing off of agricultural lands. that contain excess nutrients like phosphorus that run into waterways and in our region can feed into the Great Lakes. This is not exclusively a Great Lakes issue. This is an issue that shows up globally, and harmful algal blooms are very serious. They can create dead zones when the algae depletes oxygen in the water, making water uninhabitable for life. They can harbor bacteria and they can turn toxic. So here you have pictured a glass of water with algae in it. This is sort of a reference to the 2014 harmful algal bloom in the Western Lake Erie Basin that took out drinking water systems for Toledo, Ohio and Pelee Islands. In the bottom right corner, you see another harmful algal bloom from 2017, really sweeping the Western Lake Erie Basin. And then up top, you see dairy cows, actually from a farm in Wisconsin where the farmer and land managers are implementing interventions to reduce nutrient loading. Our work on agriculture and clean water primarily focuses in the Wisconsin Green Bay region and the Western Lake Erie Basin, but we also monitor this issue very closely at the federal level and work with farmers and just local decision makers in sort of our primary geographies to lift up solutions and tie conservation funding to clean water outcomes, which is not always an easy thing to accomplish. Aquatic invasive species is another sort of key priority for us. Here you see pictured silverhead carp jumping in Illinois rivers, and then big head carp in the bottom right. These are the two species of carp that are especially threatening, and they are moving up Illinois' river systems through the Des Plaines River towards the Great Lakes. And so our primary focus on Asian carp has been working at the state and federal level to advance the Army Corps of Engineers proposed structural interventions and barriers at Brandon Road Lock and Dam, while also looking at two-way solutions, continuing to look at and promote harvesting and monitoring efforts. And then sort of the other major invasive species issue and sort of approach that we take is looking at ballast water. So ships take in ballast water from anywhere in the world to stabilize their passage. When they arrive at port, they release ballast water, and that can contain a lot of unfriendly invasive species that can outcompete local species and really do devastating damage to ecosystems and economies. And so we are keeping an eye at the federal level, primarily at movement and opportunities to enforce ballast water protections. I'm not going to touch too much on this issue because Justin and Caroline did such a great job laying out some of the issues that we also are very focused on. But just to think about like water access, equity, and justice as a Great Lakes issue is something that I think we are very much invested in, and is a shift sometimes from sort of a traditional conservationist mindset. We really do see protecting the Great Lakes. Part of our mission is protecting that water from source to tap. The Great Lakes aren't just a body or a system of lakes sort of out there. The Great Lakes is what comes out of the Lake Michigan water comes out of my tap every day. And so for us, making sure that people have access to safe, clean, affordable drinking water is a Great Lakes priority. The Great Lakes provide drinking water for 40 million people plus across the US and Canada. And so we work with our partners like MPC, like Elevate, and other partners around the region to ensure that we are advancing clean water access. And we also see this as part of our duty to advance environmental, social, and racial justice. And then sort of lastly, we work in a lot of ways on issues like plastic pollution. So pictured here are 2 women participating in September Adopt a Beach, which I am told is ready to go, up and running in a virtual way. People are able to go out with their family and friends in this year, especially like a socially distanced way, go out, collect plastic from beaches, track what they find, and report it through our system. A Rochester Institute of Technology study found that 22 million pounds of plastic enter the Great Lakes every year. And so cleaning up beaches is not going to be the way that we fix this problem, but it is an important way to engage people and start to educate folks on the impacts of plastic pollution, how it truly is just everywhere, how it doesn't go away, and really the need to implement interventions all along the supply chain. So we also have a plastics toolkit that helps do that, and a plastics free pledge, which you can find on our website. And pictured at right, there's sort of goofy photos of my colleague Tyrone, who runs our Adopt a Beach program, and myself participating in a plastic free challenge where we tried to go a week without any single-use plastic, mixed results. And then sort of looking sort of top right at sort of just a snapshot that captures our shoreline erosion problem that shorelines across the region are experiencing. And the primary way that we think about this, because we do have so many local stewards that address this issue where it happens, we really look at the federal level at opportunities to advance and increase funding for programs like the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, so that like plantings and sort of natural restoration efforts can help reduce erosion and also restore habitat. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Annalisa. I also commend you and your colleague Tyrone for attempting going without plastic per week. I definitely find that hard myself to do. Next, we have Marcella Bondi-Keenan from the Center for Neighborhood Technology, and she'll be presenting about urban flooding and social equity.
Thanks, Hayana. So I'll be talking today about urban flooding and social equity. Excuse me. So urban flooding is the inundation of property due to stormwater overwhelming the local drainage system. So in other words, too much rain in the sewer system. It's not related to coastal or riverine flooding. Those are separate issues. There is an issue with correctly identifying where urban flooding occurs, because the established approach is to just look at FEMA floodplain maps. However, this only models risks based on the presence of rivers and coasts. It does not really depict what happens in cities when we have severe thunderstorms. Another way to do it is to look at actual flooding areas by examining insurance claim data, 311 data, structured interviews with residents, and having community forums. So the state of Illinois took this approach in 2015 and found that 99% of all counties experience flooding, and over $2 billion in flood damage payments was paid out for insurance claims. CNT also the previous year looked at Cook County in particular and added in some resident data and community data. And in addition to the economic impacts, also found that there were mental health, respiratory health, and job impacts too. So things like lost job wages. I would just want to emphasize that in Illinois, 92% of all flood-related insurance claims are outside of the FEMA floodplain map. So communities can be at risk and not even be aware of it. The State of Illinois report also showed that low and moderate income families are more impacted by flooding. You can see here on the chart, the peak is around $40,000 to $45,000 for the household. In 2018, CNT took a closer look at the city of Chicago and looked at racial impacts. So we took a similar data approach for insurance claim data. We found that even though Chicago has very limited floodplain areas, basically everywhere in Chicago floods, 95% of all zip codes, over $250,000 insurance claims, and over $400 million in damage paid out. But this is the really important part. 87% of all those insurance claims were paid in communities of color. You can see that in these two maps. On the left, we have flood insurance claims, and on the right, we have 311 flooding calls, because not everybody's going to be represented in insurance claim data. You have to be a homeowner that carries that kind of flood insurance. But even on this map, you can see that the worst flooding is the red and orange parts, and it's also the parts that are predominantly brown and black communities based on the zip codes and the census data, south and west sides. Same thing, 311 is available to anyone. Anyone can report flooding, basement flooding, or severe street flooding. And again, we see the same patterns in our brown and black neighborhoods in Chicago. Just to ground this a little bit, this is what it looks when somebody's house floods. Basement backup is one of the ways that is very common that urban flooding occurs in cities. And so water actually enters into the home through interior plumbing as it flows backwards from the sewer system when it becomes overwhelmed. This kind of damage can happen even in moderate rain events. And as you can see, it can really impact not just basements for storage, but basement living spaces too. I just want to point out that, of course, we're still in a pandemic and flooding can really exacerbate that situation. What does it mean to shelter in place when your home is flooded, when your only alternative is to maybe go to a crowded shelter where you can't actually socially distance? This map is from NOAA. It's showing the precipitation outlook for Illinois. You can see that most of Illinois is experiencing or predicted to experience a very wet year this year. So there's a few common factors in urban flooding that are pretty well established. First of all, climate change. There's been an increased number of severe storms in our region, over 40% more severe storms over the past 50 years. We also have aging sewer systems. That's a real pipe on the bottom. So even if the pipe is big enough, they become corroded over time, might not be replaced in time. And they might be too small for the current kind of storms we're getting. We're also losing trees and open space and creating more impermeable land, so rain isn't able to naturally soak into the ground like it would. And finally, we are still experiencing the fallout of the historical federal policies that create ongoing disparities in communities. You might have heard about this as redlining or racial covenants. In other words, that map from the city of Chicago is to be expected anywhere that segregation and racism has been experienced systemically. There are some solutions to this. Of course, sewer systems, as well as more traditional methods, but you can also have nature-based flooding solutions. So communities can invest in an engineered network of green infrastructure projects, things like rain gardens, bioswales, trees, across an entire neighborhood. So thoughtfully placed there, meant to interact with how stormwater is already flowing across the neighborhood. This can provide flexible and adaptable and relatively affordable stormwater service to supplement traditional sewer systems. So if you're really trying to target those critical areas where you can't maybe rip up the street and put in a $20 million sewer infrastructure project next year, you can plant along the street a row of rain gardens to really start to make a dent with the available time and money that you currently have. Also, green infrastructure has a variety of other benefits that can link to residents' priorities. So of course, like a sewer system, green infrastructure has flooding benefits, but plants also clean the air. Trees provide canopy for shade, so in case that we have a heat wave, residents are less at risk. They beautify neighborhoods. They offer space for residents to play and to gather. They can even provide jobs training programs and economic development opportunities. So thanks very much for your time. If you're interested in the City of Chicago study, I've linked some things here from CNT's website. You can see the full report on our publications page. There's also an interactive map you can look up if you are familiar with the Chicago, a particular address, and see what the flood risk is. And there's also a blog post that was co-written by CNT and Alliance for the Great Lakes and Southeast Environmental Task Force, talking about what flooding kind of looks like at the neighborhood scale and what residents are dealing with, particularly when flooding interacts with brownfields and other kinds of pollution. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Marcella. Next, we have Molly Cordes and Laura, I might butcher your name, but Barkhausen from Openlands, and they'll be presenting about the state water plan and state wetlands.
Okay, this is Laura. Let me see if I can share my screen. Oops. Are you going to share it? Got the thing saying it was disabled. I got a message saying screen sharing was disabled.
We're enabling it right now. Hold on.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, give it a shot.
Great, thanks. Great. Can you see it? All right. I'm Laura Barcusen from Openlands, and I'll be presenting with Molly about protecting the wetlands of Illinois and the Illinois State Water Plan. And I'm going to start off talking about the Illinois State Water Plan. So the Illinois State Water Plan is currently under revision. There have been two versions of this plan in the past, one in 1967 and one in 1984. The 1967 version comprised an action plan for ensuring water supply, controlling pollution, meeting recreational needs, reducing flooding, managing for conservation, and improving waterways for commercial and recreational navigation. The 1984 revision took into account growing demands on water resources, coordination of the efforts of different agencies, as well as a greater interest in conservation and wise use of energy. Critical issues that were defined in 1984 included protection of groundwater, conserving water, aquatic and riparian habitat, drought, and Illinois water use law, among others. The issues that are under consideration in the current revision process can be seen in the table in this slide. And as you can see, there are 13 issue areas, and each one has a state agency in the lead in terms of developing that issue, and other state agencies who are supporting the process. And that process defines the issue and makes recommendations to address it. And the state has included other stakeholders, including stakeholders from the conservation community, the planning community, and others, to participate in each issue committee. For example, Openlands is participating on the aquatic and riparian habitat and Illinois water law and regulation committees. So the current process is a collaborative multi-agency process that includes subcommittees that are updating the 13 sections. There's an acknowledgement that social equity issues really need to be addressed in the different committees and throughout the plan. And IEC has taken leadership to connect the conservation community to state agencies and to facilitate our participation. And Openlands is looking forward to IEC prioritizing the plan next year, as well as to the governor moving the plan forward with funding and with alignment of science and policy to result in a plan that includes wise use and stewardship of Illinois waters. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Molly. Molly, do you want me to continue to make the slides go forward?
Sure, if you don't mind, that's probably easiest.
Okay.
So my name is Molly Cordes. I'm the staff attorney at Openlands. And like Laura said, I'm just going to talk a little bit about protecting the wetlands of Illinois. So I'll start with why are wetlands so important. You can see this picture I took from Laura is a photo of a fen, which is one of the most diverse wetland habitats we have here in Illinois. So wetlands are really important, obviously, for wildlife habitat, but they also perform a number of other important functions when it comes to nutrients and toxins. They also play a huge role in flooding prevention. So this became even more important this past year when the Trump administration finalized its new definition of waters of the United States. So for those who haven't been involved in that really complicated, long process, Waters of the United States basically sets up the scope of the Clean Water Act on the federal level. So it tells us what waters can be regulated by the federal government under the Clean Water Act. This new definition is considered the most significant restriction on Clean Water Act protections. Essentially, it eliminated the significant nexus test, which was a way of telling, how water is connected and what should be protected, because all water is connected. So it also excluded any ephemeral waters, including headwater streams and wetlands. So that's anything that only exists in response to precipitation or doesn't exist year-round. Particularly when it comes to wetlands, this rule was really destructive because it excluded any wetlands that lack a direct hydrologic surface connection in a typical year. So that pretty much left about 51% of all of our wetlands unprotected at the federal level. So we have been working with IEC and other partner organizations to find a solution to protect wetlands at the state level. So what we're really looking for is finding a way to fill those gaps that were left by the rollbacks at the federal level. So we're really trying to carry this work forward by implementing or designing a program that would both build revenue for IDNR so that the agency actually has the capacity and resources it needs to protect our state wetlands, but also lay the groundwork not only for protecting wetlands, but also for restoring those that have already been lost. So we've been looking at this. We're still looking at what form that would actually take. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're exploring, there are several states like Michigan and then even some counties in Illinois that have fee in lieu programs or mitigation bank programs that basically charge a high fee to disturb or destroy wetlands, which in theory deters that activity from occurring and raises revenue for the state at the same time. Other states like California and Wisconsin have adopted like a waters of the state rule where they define the waters of the state. And these are actually really comprehensive. They include everything from rivers, streams, lakes, headwaters to groundwater. So those can be really protective on the state level. And then all of the state water programs kind of flow from that jurisdiction the same way they would on the federal level. So I think bottom line, regardless of the type of program that we explore and design and would like to move forward with, we really see this work as critical to fully protecting wetlands in all of Illinois' waterways. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Molly and Laura. We have our final speaker, Albert Ettinger. He's going to be presenting about nutrient pollution. So I'll go ahead and share his presentation. Whenever you're ready, Albert, I have your presentation ready.
I think it's possible he dropped off.
He might have. I think he said he might.
I don't see him in the participant list.
Albert, I think you might be on mute. Let's see.
Bottom left.
Okay, Albert, which phone number are you? The one that ends in 5123, or what number? There's there's also the one that ends in 482. Oh, okay, perfect. 9205. Okay, I don't see that one. Yeah, I'm not seeing the phone number pop up. Okay, sorry about that, Albert. I guess we'll just go ahead and go forward to the Q&A portion. So again, if folks have questions, you can either leave your comment in the chat box, or you can, if you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. And then also you can always email me if you would like to submit your comment through email, and I'll put my email in the chat box. So sorry, who's that?
I'm sorry, Stacy, are public comments open?
No, so you can still submit your public comment. I mean, either right now, like you can just speak, or you can put in the chat box, or you can email me. I think some of the IEC members, though, they got like a separate form with their public comment.
Okay, may I make a couple of comments? Especially since, wonderful. So I think that in addition to all of the topics that are very important that were discussed today, ensuring that we still maintain momentum behind the Clean Water Act goals of fishable, swimmable in our waterways, both so we don't backslide with degradation, but also so that we keep moving forward as the Clean Water Act intended. It would have been nice if we would have met that goal in the 1980s. We're still struggling with it in many parts of the state. But as we look at the impacts of climate change, and we look at social justice, which are absolutely deservedly at the forefront, I think we need to reflect on what that means for water quality as well, in the common sense of regulation, so that we don't lose track of the need to still be wonky at times and ensure, for instance, with the phosphorus goals for our state, that we keep moving forwards with chlorides, with many of the water quality standards wins that we have had, that we don't lose progress through nibbling away the death of 1,000 cuts through variances and time-limited water quality standards and permits, which really don't honor our progress and the potential for our waterways. And the way that IEC could be tremendously helpful in this is that, well, one, when these bills, when these regulations that are painfully crafted at the Illinois Pollution Control Boards come before JCAR, it really is essential to ensure that JCAR has at least a rudimentary understanding of why these bills are important so that we don't backslide. And the second is when we reach the point, which is a rarity, where we do need public consensus, since this is normally more of an academic, wonky regulatory proceeding rather than one, it's more like a court proceeding than it is one aired in court of public opinion. But there are times in which it is really necessary to announce progress, as well as to ensure that the public knows the importance of what's occurring. And that to spill out into our membership and to broadcast wide, so that, for instance, our funders maintain this as a focus, is really critical, so that our funding for the finite amounts that we have for all of our regions and our state's needs is still focused in part on this great need to make sure our waters are protected as far as habitat, recreational use, and water supply. So that's just a quick comment. I know that Albert was going to get into a little bit on the phosphorus, but certainly chlorides and other parameters, ammonia, these all are still ongoing battles that we see. They're just quietly fought in the background.
Thank you, Stacey, for your comments. Also, I see a couple folks in the group chat that were hoping that Albert would be able to present. Me too, I'm very disappointed that he couldn't, but I do have a copy of his slides that I'd be happy to share with folks afterwards. We also have a question from Jim Johnston. Given changing political winds over time, is any legislation going to protect the environment over time, short of possibly a constitutional amendment? I'll go ahead and let the panel, if you guys have thoughts, I'll let you guys go ahead first.
Yeah, I actually think that's a great question. While I think a constitutional amendment is very unlikely to happen, it's just such a hard thing to get done. The thing we've been sort of advocating for at Openlands is that, at least with regards to some of the Clean Water Act stuff I was talking about and the new Water of the United States definition, I think it really does require sort of a more permanent fix from Congress. I think if they could agree to amend the Clean Water Act and make it absolutely clear what was supposed to be protected in that law, I think that would be a huge step forward. Because I agree, what we can't do is just keep flipping back and forth every 4 years or every 8 years. It ultimately, in the long run, isn't going to solve much if that's the way we keep going. So in my opinion, I think a legislative fix is something we really need.
I don't know if people can hear me now.
Yes, we can. We can.
And I'm sorry. I was going to try and abbreviate myself anyway, because I wanted to allow the public time to speak, and we'd gone on pretty much all the time. But I do, if anybody had any specific questions, I'll point out a couple of things. One is, people may not know there was a toxic algae bloom in the Starved Rock Pool of the Illinois River a couple of days ago. I hope that my PowerPoint will be shared on that, but the federal advisory limit for microcystin, which is a toxin, is 8. The level in the Illinois River was 138. So that's something you might want to think about. I just also say that across the state, there are plans being developed. They're called NARPs, that are being addressed in various watersheds to bring down the level of phosphorus so that it doesn't impair waters. If you're in one of those watersheds, you might want to think about participating in that process. Beyond that, other people covered nutrients, and I'm more interested in hearing other people's questions.
Thank you, Albert. And again, sorry about that mix up. We have a couple more questions from folks. We have David Flint, and he said, I teach graduate sustainability courses at Alder EDU. Do you, IEC, offer a repository of policy bill successful template documents that other organizations and polywonks like me could benefit from? So to my knowledge, yes, to an extent, not necessarily to the public. It would be for IEC members. I mean, we have examples of bills that we passed in the past that you may be able to go back and look at and sample from, but we don't necessarily have like a template document set up ready to go for folks. I hope that answers your question. We also have Emily Projansky. Is there any way we could tie clean water to OSHA's general duty clause? I don't know if the panelists have any response to that. Or if Emily, maybe you wanted to clarify your question. Okay.
Are you asking if, like, within a workplace, clean water would be guaranteed through OSHA's general duty clause? Like making employers responsible for their plumbing, essentially? I I'm like watching the chat and trying to like speak at the same time. I had not thought about that. That's interesting to me. That makes me think about like lead testing in schools and childcare facilities. I'd want to think more about that. Thanks for making that connection though.
We have another question from Claire Talon Ruin. Is IEC opposing Duckworth's bill that some are calling water privatization bill? And Sonja asked the same question. Honestly, I'm personally not that familiar with the bill. Most of our focus is on state level legislation. I think I've heard briefly about it, but I'm personally not familiar. And I know that IEC, we haven't expressed any support of that bill. I don't know if folks have other questions or comments.
Yes, I have a question for Albert.
Okay.
Mr. Cole, I was wondering, why don't all wastewater treatment facilities require NARPs? Shouldn't it be required for all wastewater facilities?
Well, the idea was that we were going to have these look at water bodies in which they were either impaired by phosphorus or had a serious danger of being impaired by phosphorus. This all came out of lawsuits, so it was a negotiated deal. So it only covers certain water bodies that, according to criteria that were negotiated a couple of years ago, are either impaired by phosphorus or we thought were likely to be impaired by phosphorus. There are probably a whole lot of water bodies that are likely to be impaired by phosphorus, which weren't included. But frankly, we've got a bunch of these committees going on statewide, and we've got more than we can cover comfortably as it is. So be careful what you ask for. Now, if we had more people participating, then that would be good, both with the ones we've got now, and also we could press harder in some other places.
Thanks, Albert. Also, I had a question. Is it fine if I share your presentation with the folks on this call?
To who? Me? Yes. Please.
Yeah, sorry, yes.
Yes, please do.
Okay.
I should say I'm a lawyer. I've been working on this issue since the early 80s. I've represented the Sierra Club and a number of other groups on water pollution for a long time.
We have another question from Delia Barajas. Could disinfecting the Stickney wastewater facility benefit to keeping the Illinois River clean?
Well, the water pollution is a funny thing. There are various types of water pollution and they do various things. Pathogens make swimmers sick. So there are some pathogens that reach Stickney all the way from Stickney to the Illinois River, but that's probably not very many. So I think we'd be looking at other things that go further. Phosphorus coming out of the Stickney plant definitely reaches the Illinois River. And that's one of the things we've been focusing on. Pathogens will die as they go down the river, depending on various circumstances. If there's a lot of sun, ultraviolet light will kill pathogens in the water. Now, there are some that will probably make it all the way from Stickney down to the Illinois River under various conditions. Cindy or somebody else could correct that. They've tried to study how far pathogens will travel. We know things like nutrients will travel. Nitrogen and phosphorus from the Chicago area, we know gets all the way to the Gulf of Mexico to cause a dead zone there. So you got to look at different types of things and what kind of clean are you talking about?
Albert, usually the focus as far as regulation is the receiving water, and that people recreating in that receiving water are going to be exposed to, or downstream of it a certain ways, will be exposed to the bugs from the effluent, and they generally look stretch by stretch, right? Rather than huge lengths assumed stream lengths, they have more, unfortunately, of a blinder view when they regulate. Not that that's right, but they generally do.
It's a complicated process. The disinfecting at Stickney would be of most value to people recreating immediately below Stickney. And then as it gets more attenuated, the bugs that are going out of Stickney become, they die of other things before they reach a certain area, and they won't affect you. So I would be very surprised whether disinfecting at Stickney would help you swim in the, at peak and at all, whereas it would be very important to you if you wanted to do something immediately in the area of Stickney.
This matters, though, if we're looking in the future of the Chicago River system as our second shoreline being inviting, clean, and accessible to everyone where they live. And since we've been gunning for that for a while on many fronts, if that really is our goal and we want all communities to be able to touch the water, then it does matter with Stickney.
I'll just jump in there. Stacy, I agree with you. I think the way the question was written, it was about the Illinois River, and I think Albert's answer is correct for the Illinois River. I think the question is, should we be disinfecting the wastewater at Stickney and anywhere else for some reason? I think the answer is yes. It just may not be for water quality that far downstream. I guess I have an observation more than a question, in that, like, the vast majority of people who took this poll identified flooding and stormwater as the thing that affects them most daily. And Marcella gave a good presentation about the work that CNT is doing, and many of us do similar work or partners. I fear we're not doing enough on the legislative front to really make a difference on urban flooding issues. And I don't know what it is that we should be doing, but I think it warrants a bigger and more substantive and more focused discussion specifically about that and what urban flooding looks like in different places. Water coming in basements is certainly the northeastern Illinois manifestation of urban flooding. But as we've learned from folks in Centerville and NRDC, like, they have massive urban flooding there. It's not coming from basements, but it's also not coming from rivers, and it's not coming from lakes. And it's right. I just think we need to have a more substantive discussion as a group about legislative and administrative solutions to urban flooding specifically, because a lot of what we're doing right now seems like advocacy to one utility at a time about ways they should do something differently. And that'll get us only so far. So just an observation.
Well, I guess I'd respond to your observation. There's a lot of different elements in that. With regard to combined sewer overflows, the permits have been holding fire for a number of years with regard to the city of Chicago and a number of other municipalities. A lot of municipalities in Northeast Illinois are probably in violation of the Clean Water Act now under their existing Clean Water Act permits. Then how flooding manifests itself as an important issue is going to be different, as you note, in various places. We got a big issue here with all sorts of illegal levees on the Mississippi River that have been built that are causing flooding in other places because they've got too high of a levee one place. We're shoving water away from some farm field and putting it in downtown East St. Louis. So we've got to look at that sort of set of issues too.
I hear you, Albert, but even combined sewer overflows are a function of, are a element of riverine water quality issues, as opposed to, why does no utility seem to think that it's their responsibility to keep water out of somebody's basement or viaducts or other things?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by utility then?
What do I mean by a utility? Wastewater utility.
Well, those are a lot of the cases. Those are who we're fighting with CSO permits about.
I know you're fighting them, Albert, but CSOs are not exactly the same thing as basement backups. And what I get pushback from by whoever it is, MWRD, City of Chicago, whatever, is I'm not talking about CSO issues. I'm talking about everyone passing the buck on who's responsible for preventing water from chronically damaging property.
You're speaking specifically about basement backups.
I'm
And
talking
that
about
is,
urban flooding as Marcella defined it, and I don't think we're doing enough on it. I agree.
Okay.
We're probably not doing enough on river issues and in-stream water quality.
okay, I understand now. You're talking about basement backups, and that is a different set of problems, and I agree.
So Josh, I do agree with you that urban flooding requires a more holistic fix. It's not, we have to look at the land-water nexus, right? And we have to look at decentralizing, especially with the increases of impacts from climate change, instead of thinking that we're going to build ourselves out of, with another 100-year system of this problem with huge tunnels and big rock quarries to be able to hold it all, right? And we know that there are problems inherent with everybody even being able to hook into the system that we have. And we know that that system is going to fail us and does fail us, even if it was working optimally and everybody could, right? So things like nature-based solutions, things like the, David St. Pierre, when he was here, the fourth reservoir is going to be critical. The question that I have, and I'll touch the third line because I seem to be good at it. Every water management ordinance session that I've been in for the last over 10 years, which is scary, we all dance around the fact that we're building ourselves into flooding rather than out of it by the way that we require people to handle stormwater. And we all hear that it's way too expensive and there's no way that we can do it. And yet everybody freaks out when you have over $1 billion per storm event of damage, which generally rests most heavily on the shoulders of divested communities. And we all know this. So when is it going to be time when we actually have the ability to call it like it is and have people actually responsibly build stormwater infrastructure, green or gray, to meet the needs for the lifespan of whatever they're building, not for a 20-year storm, not for a 100-year storm. When do FEMA maps actually accurately pair with what we know about urban flooding to create the baseline for standards? And how can we have those dictated in a state that's so gun shy of making any kinds of commitments like that with the demographic that we have in Springfield?
Yeah, so I hear you. I wasn't exactly looking to be lectured by anybody. I was just pointing out that it would seem to me to be valuable to have a substantive discussion specifically about urban flooding, again, going back to CNT's definition, and are there legislative or administrative approaches that we can be taking that we've tried and failed or haven't taken yet as a different manifestation of flooding. That's it. Welcome that conversation at some point.
Otherwise, I was muted. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. This has been a really, really good discussion. Thank you for folks who also put their questions in the group chat, as well as our panel experts and our other IEC members. We are 15 minutes past the hour, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up now. But again, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And again, if you have more public comments, feel free to email me, and that's at iyana@ilenviro.org. All right. Thank you, everybody.